Hi, everybody. I think I have this on the right setting here. Welcome back to the Trust Yourself Summit. I'm Cheryl Fidelman, and I'm really, really psyched to be here with Stacy Hoch. Stacy Hoch is a columnist, an adjunct psychology professor, workshop facilitator, student of epigenetics, which I'm really excited to bring this school of thought to this summit of epigenetics. She's a self-healing Sherpa, life coach, chakra-centered psychotherapist, and author of the book Imperfectly Sane. Hi, Stacy.
Hey, Cheryl. So
Hi.
glad to be here.
I'm so psyched that you're here. You're just like a really vibrant wealth of knowledge that I'm excited to tap into. And I'm going to start with the same question that I've been starting all of the interviews with, which is, how would you explain or describe codependency?
So I want to preface this with, I tend to work with codependent empaths. So I'm not saying that this is the only way to become codependent, but psychologically speaking, as a psychotherapist and a student of energy work, which is always, everybody's a student of that reality, I'm more interested in describing the energetic exchange at play, because there is a dance of codependency and what that looks like to me. And I would encourage everybody to, the way that you found me, that video, I think I called it the empath, the codependent, and the narcissist who's what. I would encourage everybody to go check out that video on my YouTube page. But the way that I foresee this is that codependency is actually the energetic addiction to saving somebody else, because there's been somebody in our lives who we were not emotionally able to save, that we felt responsible for energetically. So that created voids, and we saw voids in other people, and energetically we wanted to fill them. And what that does to the codependent is actually it sucks the essence out of the codependent, and we try to fill somebody else's void with maybe what we would want in that void, not what they actually want in that void. Does that make sense? So we have created deficits because we go, I am emotionally responsible for this human being that I can't be available for, because they're actually, normally this is coming from parenting, they're supposed to be responsible for me. And the only way either of us are going to get our needs met is if I take the reins and meet this person's emotional needs. And then that transcends into adult life, and we form codependent relationships with everything. Even a woman this morning emailed me and she said, I'm codependent on my 6-year-old daughter. And the problem with that is that actually in that regard, and there's always a dance here, codependents do create narcissistic people, because we are the fixer. We look at them and go, you have to change something about yourself that's not actually broken about that person, right? So if we're codependent on our daughter and we're going, we project out there and we go, you are the symbol of my shame, my guilt, or I have to protect you from your own shame and your own guilt. Either way, that daughter's going to have the perfect daughter.
And so, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you're saying is potentially that's a projection, right? That mother you're talking about may need to handle her own shame and guilt.
But yes. Well, the ironic thing is, us as codependents, we're built on projection, right? And it's intermediate, or it's intermittent. We're going, like, I have to be this to be the perfect daughter, right? Or I have to rebel against it. So either way, the role of the projection, the role that is being projected upon us, is still running our lives. So we comply to the role and go, I'm going to emotionally suit your needs, or we rebel against the role and go, screw you for even, for trying to squeeze me in there, but we're still looking there at the role. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So we've lost our essence in the vein of the role. And that's where the codependent is deficit. And that's where we go, I'm just trying to fill anything out there, find anything out there that's going to fill me in here, but we're not conjuring energy inside. We're just throwing it into other people's voids. And we're using that as like, if I save you, then I'm helping myself save myself in some way, instead of it being from an overflow. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm. An overflow meaning? I'm fulfilled and I actually have excess. So I actually have,
Yeah. Like
actually
I'm not coming
really
from a void.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so speaking of shame and guilt, and your study of epigenetics, would you say that if that codependence and potentially this shame and guilt is inherited and passed on?
Well, absolutely. And the thing about this is I work with empaths. And when you're an empath coming into the planet and you're supposed to break a lineage. So I work with a lot of empaths, ironically, who have mothers who are therapists or who became therapists themselves that are codependent because they were empathing with a codependent mother who was in a relationship with somebody who was narcissistic. And there's no blame game to that reality. Like the narcissist started out in what has been, really made a lot of sense to me. The narcissist started out as somebody who didn't have somebody to with. So you have to have a to be in a codependent relationship. And the narcissist was somebody who literally, like when we're children, I have 4 children. I'm the mother of 4, about to have my 4th child. And we need somebody to plug into. And when you're being raised by a codependent or a narcissist, both of them are kind of void of themselves. And there's no place for you to feel grounded. It's not like you're going, oh yes, I'm on the planet and this is a safe place to be. It's like nobody has my back. And the only way I belong here is to have everybody else's back. So we have the epigenetics, which epigenetics in simple terms means we can just ixnay the whole nature versus nurture debate. It's both. It's actually that nurture changes nature, which is really good because if we understand that nurture changes nature, we can nurture ourselves into a new reality. But we have to understand that, genetics aren't a fixed thing. They are malleable depending on what circumstances come into your life. Certain switches are going to be turned on or turned off. So if you have a lineage of trauma and you are dumped onto the planet and you are feeling the vibrations of all of the stories that came before you, and you're feeling all of that trauma, there's one aspect of that because your DNA is literally wired to be hypervigilant to trauma, and you are filtering through a perception as an empath of all of the unresolved traumas in your lineage. So then on top of that, if we don't do our work as mothers or as parents or as people, that continues not from a biological standpoint, but from a psychological standpoint. So oftentimes mothers who don't resolve their own shame, their own guilt, they are codependent, so they're looking out there to fix somebody else, but they never actually take the time to see themselves, which is what we do as codependents. It's like, and when we do see ourselves, we don't trust it. So we're like, let me just go fix somebody else because that I might be able to do. So if we
look at ourselves and we don't trust it. Can you say more about that?
Well, I do. It's so funny because this morning I was like, I'm just going to go for it because I was really debating saying what I really felt about this. And in my experience, from that place, where we are when we're in the codependent psychology pattern, which is a mental structure. It's a psychological prison that has a density. We shouldn't trust ourselves from that place because we don't know. And we think that we know. We think that we blame ourselves, we judge ourselves, I should know better, or I do know better, but I'm still engaging in this. We are operating from a sense of ungrounded trust. So I don't think from that space that we should trust each other. I think that the work is the process of getting, or ourselves, I should say, the work is the process of getting into the self. Like when you think of the way that I described the codependent, just kind of exiting the self, going, I can save you. I'm going to fill you with my essence because I see a void and I want to help you. And I'm going to give you my essence. When we take that back and get fully into the selves, all of our nooks and crannies that feel dark, feel dense, feel like, oh, I don't want to be in this physical body because it hurts to be on this planet. It's a very dense place to be. When we can get all the way in there, we kind of understand that all of those parts, they're fluid. So we become a channel, and then we can trust the channel. But when we're trusting ourselves from a mental space and not a heartfelt space, as what we often do, we're trusting ourselves from a like, I'm going to run, or I'm going to fight or flight, or it's his projection or her projection. And when we get fully into the body and take ownership for like the creation that is unfolding, and actually it's like a creation that's at play for our psychological benefit, because we see what we expect to see. So when we embody, which is really like pulling back all of those broken pieces through shadow work, through inner child work, going back in time and being like, okay, I remember fragmenting. I remember feeling like I got hit by a car by that experience and like a part of my energy body flying out the window. And I'm going to pull that back. And when we pull all of those pieces back, trust doesn't even become a thing, because it's just a natural, it's like you are the river. You are just, it's just moving. You don't have to worry about trusting it. So I think that we seek trust from a space of not trusting, which is going to keep us kind of separated from our embodiment and our mindset, if that makes sense.
That's interesting. We seek trust from a place of not trusting. Can you say more about that? Yeah, it's just, it seems sort of heartbreaking. It seems sort of like a, it's like in search of nothing, right? Like we there's a search, there's a desire, but there's no end game because we don't trust.
Well, that's ironically everything you just said, the seeking of codependency, because that's what it is. It's a seeking, right? We are just like, where is it? Whatever it is, what is it? I got to find it, because like it's going to complete me. It's going to make me feel okay. And then we get the thing that we thought that we sought, and then it's not good enough anyway. And then we keep moving in search of something. And they're all parts of ourselves that we're looking for. And we are externalizing it, trying to find it in other people and other circumstances and other situations. So to pull back those parts and actually be in a position of, if I loved me regardless, and if I didn't, nothing in my life changed today, and for the rest of my life it was going to be exactly like it is today, can I be okay with that? Do I know how to do this? Am I okay to stay right here? Because most of us are not. We go, staying is boring, and I am not boring. I know more. I know beyond boring. I know, like, I'm not going to stay put somewhere, because we're always on the search. And it's really in the staying of the feelings, in the staying of the, not fragmenting ourselves because of shame. Again, not dissociating because we're experiencing shame, but going, okay, I'm going to stay here with my shame. I'm not going to abandon myself because I experienced shame. I'm going to stay in my body, even though it hurts to be in a body and I don't understand it. And my body is wired for, kind of stress or whatever. Staying is, in my experience, the only way to find the trust that we're looking for. So it's not heartbreaking if you can stay long enough to stop searching for that which you don't even know that you want. We don't really know what we want, really. Like we have ideas, we have visions, but at the end of the day, when we really pull apart these things, so many of us have psychological barriers that say, if I got that thing, I would hate myself, or I would become. Last night I worked with somebody who said he would become this kind of man if he got what he wanted, which was like this, in his mind, pathetic little boy-ish of a man, or he would become dangerous. So either way, he can't get what he wants because he's searching, and he thinks that if he got it, he would become somebody different. And we are what we are. So it's like the codependent tries to become something, to be something, and she doesn't necessarily recognize what she is because she doesn't allow herself to be that what she is. Like, we are animals. We have to honor the animal. And when we honor ourselves as an animal and go, okay, if I'm just the elephant, or if I'm just the lion, if I'm just this, and I can wipe out all of my old stories and just be in the consciousness of my animal, would I reject her? Would I reject this experience? The answer is very likely no. If we were fully in and honored the animal, instead of trying to make it be something it's not, instead of like being fish in a current and trying to get out of our current, which is often what we do. We're like, well, I want to be that kind of, I want to be in that current. Let me go there.
And potentially those wants, like your client from last night, he said if he had what he wanted, or if he was the man that he wanted to be, who we picture ourselves to be, that desire of our ultimate self, where is that desire coming from?
Oh, here's the ironic thing. I love that question because I think it is your truest self. It's just that we can't get there from trying to get there. It's like, that's what you are. And if you settle into that, if you, instead of trying, instead of going, I might not act, because from that place we're going, I might not actually be that. And I'm probably going to have to do a lot of work to do that. But what I found is that the less we resist what we actually are. So the less we resist the shame, the guilt, the fear of showing up, the less we resist that which we are, the quicker the route is to getting to that other place. But we as codependents find it very hard to get where we actually are. And the only way we can get to where we want to go, or to that vision of a higher self, is by planting our feet firmly where we are now, so we can actually walk up the mountain, because we're not going to be elevated. It's not going to work like that. We have to have our feet on the ground to step into that person, because even if you became that person tomorrow, you wouldn't trust it. You would self-sabotage it if you didn't step fully into being that person. And that comes with honoring all of our parts and allowing them to be what they are, instead of rejecting ourselves for having them, and then, finding somebody else on the outside who might receive our rejected parts or might need them somehow. That makes sense.
What are some steps somebody could take to start this path of, quote, honoring themselves or not resisting who they are, when for the path of codependence, and myself as a recovering codependent, I identified so much with who I was that which would help you be who you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what are some steps somebody can take to start saying, I'm going to put less energy into helping them become who they are, and put some of that energy over here? Because that is like, how do we do that? How do I even start that? And how do I even have the conversation? Because like, when I started my recovery and I started taking this massive energy away from people, relationships started to shift, and that was a whole nother thing to manage as well. I know that was like a question with the part A and B, but.
Well, that part is inevitable. That whole part of there, in one of my videos, I heard this story and it so resonated with me and I loved it. It is inevitable that when we take our power back, which is not necessarily our energy, because we actually have to utilize our energy to look at that long enough to go, actually, I'm going to find power in that exchange instead of take my energy back from it, if that makes sense. Like, our energy as a source being is constantly in flow. So it's not, in my experience, it's not that we're taking our energy back. It's that we are recognizing and taking responsibility for that which we came to take responsibility for, which is ourselves, if that makes sense. And there's a power to that. But the inevitable process of going from, okay, I'm in all of these codependent relationships and I'm realizing that like they're all going to fall and I kind of have to let them, or whatever that looks like. There is a story about if you put crabs in a bucket. Have you ever heard this? If you put crabs in a bucket, and the strongest one will inevitably get out, right? But what happens is that the crabs underneath that crab pull it down so it can't get out. So we are kind of, the people I work with are on the precipice of kind of tipping the bucket, but we have to first recognize that people are gonna pull us back. They're gonna pull us down. You're gonna feel selfish. You're gonna feel like an asshole. You're going to feel all of the ways that you've been avoiding feeling in trying to save them. It's gonna slap you right in your face, and it's gonna hurt a little bit. And at least it's your hand doing it, right? Like, we can take the power back in that regard by saying, this is my slap. This is my slap in the face that I gave myself, because I wanted to feel this again. Because if I keep externalizing it, it's going to keep happening. What was the first question you asked, though? You asked something about
what are some first steps somebody can take to start putting the energy of trying to fulfill somebody else's life or goals, and to put that energy towards oneself? in fulfilling themselves and their own goals.
You said something that like a word that you used stuck out, and I really wanted to utilize it. So it's really funny in my video, and I stopped reading my comments after that actually, because I just like, I'm way too, I just can't read the comments. But somebody said, you're trying to turn empaths into narcissists because we are inevitably, as codependents, required to pull back our energy into our own cup. And that's the nature of the beast. That's the nature of the animal. That's fully why we came here, is to be inside of our container.
That's interesting, because I've noticed that in that there's the rub where shame and guilt sort of is born, right? Putting energy towards somebody else in that codependent way, and then, wait, I'm actually going to shift this and handle my own growth, my own dreams, my own feelings, my own emotions. Oh my gosh, I feel shame and guilt now.
And we feel like we're leaving people behind somehow too. There's this like, oh, I'm not bringing them with me. I'm not loyal. Mm-hmm. Those psychological snags that hook us. What would I say? So here's the thing. Even as a psychotherapist, it to me is about embodiment. It's about nestling into the physical and energetic body and pulling back those voids. So shadow work is a really big part of my practice, because as codependents, we do tend to, everyone is projecting, but as codependents, we have a tendency to see everything outside of ourselves as holy, as beautiful, as worth saving. And we're doing that from a deficit place. So when we start living not for, I'm living for everybody else, and then we have to inevitably learn to live for ourselves for a time being. But beyond that, we learn to live for everyone, which includes ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess there is the phase where we have to go into it and be like, I'm going to pull back energy and I'm not going to engage and I'm not going to do these things. But it's really about looking at our dark parts and going, okay, why would it not be okay if I was that person that I'm judging, or if I am the person I'm trying to save? Why would that not be okay with me? And really looking at because judgments are no different than projections. And when you're built on projections, which is, in my experience, codependents are built on projection. So it's basically like your parent looks at you and says, this is who you have to be. And we become it with a smile, or we become it with a big F you. And either way, when we start ripping apart those projections and going, okay, which one is me? Which one am I just so afraid to integrate and let be me? When we start pulling those off, it's like pulling down the walls of a house that we've lived in. Mm-hmm. And the house has been prison, so to speak. But the work then is, in my experience, about demolition to rebuild that which you want to live in, and to have some windows, to have some discernment about who you let into your house, because not everyone's your animal. And that's cool, because if you honor that you're an animal, you're going to get that there's just a reality to frequencies, and there's just a reality to different species, and that the human being is the melting pot because we have psychological species. It's not like we're different animals. We're different psychological animals. And when we really can honor that which we are and know it and be like, I'm willing to be intimate with this thing, like fully intimate with the self, which takes a lot of courage to be like, I'm going to sit here. I'm going to sit here, even though I'm throwing an energetic temper tantrum. I'm going to sit here and feel this. I'm going to sit here and look at myself in a way that I don't want to see myself. I'm going to consider, how am I like my mother? How am I like my father? How am I like the people that I hate? What are they getting away with that I'm pissed off that I never got away with? And actually, let me just pick up a couple of those parts and like see how if I tried them on and I integrated them, would they make me feel more whole? And the ironic thing is like, yeah. Right? Like if a codependent goes, I'm constantly saving everybody else, what we're really saying is, I don't trust anybody's going to come save me. So I want to be the person that I don't believe even exists for everybody else. Right? We're like, I have to save the world because nobody's coming to save me, and I want the world to see that somebody's willing to save us.
This
So
about, sorry to interrupt you, about looking at how am I like my mother and how am I like my father, and that scratches the surface of the epigenetic conversation, right? And also, I sort of want to like marry that thought with what you mentioned about rebuilding this house, right? And I thought, for a lot of us, we're still living in the house we grew up in.
totally.
Right? Our current house or apartment may look different. The current office that we work in may look physically different, but we're still reacting to that environment as if we're in the house that we grew up in.
Yeah. And it's scary to be dismantled too. Like, the demolition is not fun. It's scary. And most people don't want to do it. Sorry, go ahead.
No, keep going. I mean, speak to those people who may not want to do it. How imperative is it to really look at and dissect your relationship to your parents' personality, how your psychological disposition was formed by and influenced by your relationship with your parents? How important is that to look at?
Well, it's vital, because I, as a, somebody who has healed myself, and that's not true. I healed myself via a source that is much greater than myself. But as somebody who was willing to listen long enough to let that happen, and please, like, read my book. It shares many kinds of different healings that come up. But on a level of true intimate healing, I work with people who it's so obvious, it's palpable to me, that they are literally replicating the exact same dynamics that they hated, or that they hate, that they were the victim of in their relationships with their parents. And they replay them. And they can't even see that that's what they're doing because they're in it. So it's almost like, we have to use a spirituality to look above the psychology and go, okay, that's the house that I'm living in, right? Do I really want to live in that house? And when you're in the house, everything out there feels dangerous. So of course you're just like, I'd rather stay in, I'd rather know this hell, because out there it's probably even more dangerous. So like, at least this is.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. When you say you have to take a spiritual, say that again, a spiritual view. Can you say
of the psychology?
Okay.
So like, you have to be objective enough.
Almost like looking at yourself from a bird's eye view.
Yes, totally.
Separating yourself, or these days I call it a drone's eye view.
Oh my God, that's so sad, but so true.
That's a joke, yeah. Take it, you can have it.
Nice.
So look at objective, which is, I think, is the first baby step to dissecting our codependence, trusting ourselves and coming back to ourselves.
Yeah.
Where we're not so stuck and married to our identity, where we can get space from it, some dissonance, look at it objectively and say, and then you can say, oh, that part's from my mother, that part's from my father, that part's from that like weird thing that happened when I was 5. And then we are left with more of a blank canvas from which to create. How does that resonate with you?
Totally. And it's so also what I want to say is that from that place, when you're not in it, you're not judging it. So that's the thing I see is like, people are like, no, I'm not like that. I would never be like that. And there's so much blame and shame, again, projected outward. And that's that is the work of the codependent, to bring that back in and go, okay, I'm going to like hold this and it's not going to kill me. But when we're looking at it from like, oh, that's just the house that I've lived in my whole life, instead of how dare you and how dare they, and they made me be like this, you're looking at it with a sense of control, because you understand that from that perspective, you have the pen in your hands to go, actually, I'm going to rewrite that blueprint. I'm going to take down that wall, and it's going to feel very scary and expansive, because as codependents, we're like, I want to contract. Don't let me out. And breaking down those walls kind of feels like you're just water rushing out of a system, and it's like, I am nothing. You literally go through a phase where you're like, I am nothing. I have been returned to infancy, and now who do I want to become from my nothingness? Like, how do I become the everything that I actually have been? It's really a journey of remembering who we are before we forgot who we were.
So beautiful.
I think, did I answer your question at all? I'm sorry.
You totally answered my question, and I was just sort of sitting in the beauty of that return to purity, return to innocence, return to these beautiful receptors of love and having full contact with the world. And I was just really just bathing in that.
Can I say something really quick?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure.
So for me, it's also not about receptors in the sense that like when we, oh my God, what did you say? You just said something that I really want to touch on. What is the first thing that you said when you started that? When you said, okay, this is really beautiful that we, no, it's terrible.
I don't remember. But
giving the same sense of innocence to your parents, to the people who've harmed you, being in an objective enough position to go, they are all hurt babies. They've all formulated their own houses based on experiences that they've had. And it is not to blame them that they don't know better or that they didn't know better. But now that I do know better, I can actually, I'm not just receptive to my own innocence, I am projective of theirs. So that feels important because it's a lot of us want to go like, well, I am this way because this. And it's like, okay, I hear that story and I get it. And we can keep it or we can change the whole architecture of the house. And it comes with really allowing innocence for other people the same way that we would allow for ourselves.
That's so interesting because to look at our parents as also unfixed, like nothing is fixed, like codependency is not fixed. It's movable, it's changeable, it's studyable, it's transformable. And our parents, however their personality was and their psychological dynamic was and how they treated us, it's not fixed, right? Like my dad was this way or my mom was this way. They're products of their upbringing as well. Is that
and that right there is the nature of epigenetics. Like you are inheriting a story and it's at the fault of, but at really the just the play out of somebody who didn't know they could change the story.
And in there also, I think potentially wrapped in codependence is a loyalty. Like my mother did it this way, I'm loyal to that habit, that trait, that way of being. Mm-hmm. So there's in the healing of these epigenetic ties, I don't know if that's a word, sorry, I made it up, or codependent ties. In the healing of it, some of it is detaching from that which we feel like we need to stay attached to, as far as our parents and our childhood. How does that land for you?
So the way it lands for me is like this. So we are, in my experience, we are in a connected relationship. Whether we are psychologically intertwined with them or not, we are connected to them. So I actually think that the problem has been detachment in the first place, right? So we go, okay, well, I have to detach from this because it's not what I want or it's not this. But actually the reality is that's what we always wanted. We wanted the mommy who was going to show up for us the way that we wanted her to. We wanted the daddy who was going to show up for us the way that we wanted them to show up for us. And we wanted them to attach and connect to us in a way that didn't hurt, right? So when it hurts us, we go, oh, I just want to be able to detach from these old stories, from these old things. And actually, in my experience, it's the willingness to connect to them without judging them. So it's like, and I'm not saying like, oh, be in a relationship with your abusive mother, but in that detachment, let's let it be a detachment of physicality, not heart space, if that makes sense. Like we are inevitably connected. And the more we try to separate and go, okay, I'm not connected to my parents in this way, or I want to detach from this pattern or this person, the more we do that, the more we are actually engaging in separation. It's going to be a piece of us that we're going to inevitably eventually want to bring back anyway, if that makes sense. So it's actually that we have to recognize we didn't get what we wanted and that hurt us. So we wanted to detach from it. But if we can connect to that, which hurt us, and go, I'm willing to understand I'm connected to you anyway. And I'm going to see you in your innocence. And I'm going to feel myself in my innocence in that connection. So I can separate from you physically, but I don't have to do anything else other than that. Just like, I understand I'm connected to you and I will love you from a distance. But stay connected. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's honoring what is so.
Totally. And that's what we do as codependents. We are obsessed with potential. And we do not, God, if I could write a whole book. Actually, my next book is going to be How to Untame a Broken Horse, because it is about honoring. And we try to go, oh, but I think you love me and I think we could work and I see that you're being like this, so I'm confused and I don't really understand. And what's obvious is that relationship is what it is, but we try to go, no, really, like we can create it into something more. It doesn't have to be this way. I'm going to stay here for you and prove to you nobody's ever going to leave you and I'm going to love you and blah, 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 blah. And we're not honoring. And then what does that create for the other person too? It's like, we can say that, we are created by narcissistic people, but what does it create when we're pushing our agenda, our psychological desires, and our desire to give that person that which we feel like we didn't get ourselves? It says to them, there's something that you need to fix. There's something that I want from you that you're not giving me. It says like, it's very overwhelming. If it was a normal, healthy person, they'd hopefully love you enough to be like, okay, chill, this is your space and this is mine. But if you get with a narcissistic person in that paradigm, your life is over. I mean, you're gonna spend years of your life dealing with not honoring that, like, what people say doesn't matter nearly as much as what they do.
So we're going to come to a close. Any more thoughts that you want to throw in there at the end here?
So maybe just that we don't need to fix anything. Like the codependent is the fixer, the empath is the healer. And it really, for me, again, I'm going to reiterate it because you just did too, but it is about honoring that really nothing needs to be fixed. It needs to be integrated. It needs to be brought into union. So we're not broken. They're not broken. The people who've, abused or rejected or done, harmed us. It's not our job to fix anything because nothing needs to be fixed. It really is about honoring and integrating that which we've rejected in ourselves and abandoned ourselves for the sake of other people not abandoning themselves. If we bring that back into union with ourselves, we'll understand that we never needed to be fixed in the first place. Like we've been whole. We've just been like fragmented into a kaleidoscope that doesn't really make sense. And all of our parts in the spaces between, like the darkness, we're afraid of them. So we stay in perspective fragments instead of letting it be a whole image that's very clear to us. So we don't need to fix anything. It's just about like kind of shaking it up and bringing it all back in so those dark parts don't separate.
And really being able to be with the longing and the desire and the shame and the guilt, and being with that which we've been ignoring within ourselves.
Yeah. Which is hard, but if we have to understand, and I would really invite people to read Imperfectly Sane, but if we don't do it, our granddaughters are going to pay for it. Like I am the direct line recipient of a grandmother who I have empathed with my whole life because she had so much trauma, so much shit, and she didn't know how, wouldn't deal with it. And I, as the empath coming into this lineage of generational trauma, I'm going, oh my God, how do I be on this planet? Like this shit sucks, it hurts. And if she would have pulled that back into herself, I might have had a cleaner slate. So what we don't do, our granddaughters will have to do for us.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Stacy. I wish I could go on and on for hours with you, and maybe we'll do another one at some point. Thank you for your time. Bye, everybody. See you again.
Bye.
Express yourself.
If I hang up now, are you gonna like? Do I hang it up?
I'll press the button right now.
Okay, great. All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.